All right, so we're back this time on YouTube and not Reddit by popular demand. So a lot of you guys asked for a more in-depth tutorial on how to run Stable Diffusion XL and the ComfyUI workflow builder on standard Linux cloud GPU servers. And this is a workflow that I recommend starting with, whether or not you are a hobbyist or a student that's just learning Stable Diffusion and how to build different things with that software, all the way up to if you are, say a startup entrepreneur and you're trying to build an app that you'll eventually scale out based on Stable Diffusion. So this method is pretty standard. We're going to use things like Secure Shell and Linux, very kind of standard technologies that we've all been using for decades and aren't going to really change anytime soon. And we'll build an architecture that's easy, cheap, flexible to changing requirements you have as you get more experienced, and most important of all is very standard. So if you go looking for help, whether or not it's an engineer you hire on Fiverr, or you go post in a forum or on Reddit or something like this, you're going to have a setup that a lot of people are really going to quickly understand how to help you out with, which I think is always important when you're really getting into the engineering side of these things. Hope this helps. So first, before we talk about anything else, I want to emphasize something very important, which is remember to deprovision your server. We're going to be using inexpensive server instances, ones that cost between 50 and 75 cents per hour. However, if you accidentally leave this thing on for an entire month, you will still get a bill that will be, a surprise to you, right? We're not going to be as bad as this meme on the right here, where somebody spins up a bunch of EC2 servers and accidentally bills themselves $50,000. I do know people this has happened to before, for sure. Remember to deprovision your server. If you stop this tutorial in the middle, go back and terminate your server instance before you go and do anything else. Or at the very least, when you go to enter your credit card on the cloud service provider, use a credit card with a low limit. So if you're a really forgetful person, maybe you have a credit card only has like an $800 limit. That's a great one to use for this because you won't, of course, get billed more than $800. Also, if any of this is interesting to you, please feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. This is where I usually live. I'm not really much of a YouTuber, if you can't tell. So this diagram represents what we're going to set up today. It's maybe pretty simple to a lot of you all to understand, but for those of you that may be new to server administration, I'll walk through it pretty quick. So, of course, the core of all this is probably that you want to rent GPU time because you don't want to shell out thousands of dollars for GPUs right now, or owning your own hardware doesn't make sense. So we're going to provision a GPU server, which we're going to name Lambda GPU server because we're going to use Lambda Cloud. I'll explain why in a moment. And this server is ephemeral. That means that we will turn it over, we'll terminate it every time we're done using it, so then we're not being billed. Meanwhile, Stable Diffusion XL and ComfyUI are going to be installed on a persistent volume. The volume is very inexpensive. I think it's like 20 cents per gigabyte per month. So this we can leave persistent. We don't really have to worry about this racking up a really large bill at the amount of storage we're going to be using. And every time that we provision a server, this persistent volume will be mounted to that server. So we'll always be able to access our ComfyUI environment regardless of the fact that we have destroyed our old server environment and provisioned a new one. And the magic that will allow us to be able to reuse our ComfyUI and Stable Diffusion environment will be something called a Python virtual environment. And so the Python virtual environment will allow us to use a Python environment that's installed on this persistent volume rather than configured and installed on the GPU server's operating system itself. So this is usually a best practice for anybody that gets into any type of system administration or software development. Certainly anytime I'm writing Python applications, I always use this virtual environment. It makes debugging applications especially a whole lot easier. But here we're going to use it for system administration purposes. Now, keeping everything secure. So this whole setup, and this is pretty standard if you're new to cloud administration, but our server will only be accessible via port 22, which is the secure shell port on Linux and virtually any other operating system out there. So we will still be able to use a variety of applications through port 22, and we'll be able to access the ComfyUI web UI via a technique known as tunneling, which I will explain later on. It's actually very simple to configure. On our local machine, we're going to have to set up two files. So one is called your SSH config file. It's just called config, no txt extension on it. And there we'll give your secure shell client instructions on how to actually use your GPU server, how to connect to it. And we're also going to have this key, which we'll name lambda.privatekey. We'll get it from Lambda Cloud in a moment. And this is how we'll actually authenticate into your server. Please don't lose this. If you do, some crypto miners may be likely to hack your server and crypto mine on your server. And to do administration, now the real standard way to do all this is, of course, via just a terminal like bash or zish. However, in practice, I think that, especially for people that are new, but honestly, even for people that are old like me, sometimes some graphical tools are a little bit more efficient. So we're going to be using Visual Studio Code with the Secure Shell extension to browse and edit the files on our server. So it works very nicely. Actually, I really love the VS Code Secure Shell extension. And then for file transfer and backing up our ComfyUI server, if we want to, say, move it to another cloud, we will use FileZilla. Now, this is purely optional. You might not need to really do this, but it's pretty easy to use. I'll explain how to use it. It's a bit easier to use than command line tools like rsync, although there are some, especially speed advantages to using rsync if you learn how to use it. One other quick note is that this is not necessarily the only workflow you can or even should use. However, I do recommend starting out with this particular workflow, where I will say that your workflow will probably change, especially if you get into software development. So you're taking the things that you're building in Stable Diffusion and then trying to integrate it into, say, like a production app, or you're building a server that you're going to share with a team or something of the sort. Then once your requirements start changing like that, you'll have to start mutating this architecture to support that cleanly. If you have questions on, hey, I've got this particular situation, or this part of this workflow doesn't work well for me because of X reason, just put them in the comments and I'll try to address it as best as I can. And who knows, maybe you'll inspire me to make another cloud architecture video. Now let's get started on actually choosing our cloud. I know that I already told you guys that we're going to be using Lambda Cloud. In this table, I summarize basically why I'm choosing Lambda Cloud in particular. Now, as of right now, Lambda Cloud is slightly more expensive at the low end than the next kind of most beginner-friendly option, which I believe is Paperspace by DigitalOcean. However, we're still going to use Lambda Cloud because I really think that it is just the most beginner-friendly GPU cloud to use. They give you very standard Linux instances, no surprises. all the drivers are already pre-configured, so you don't have to worry about hardware incompatibilities. And like literally all they do are GPU server rentals. So you'll see the interface for their console is very easy to use, very easy to understand. And particularly, I will call out that Paperspace, which is actually my kind of preferred platform right now. I'm a DigitalOcean user personally for my own personal projects. Right now they have to actually manually approve you to use the GPUs. Their support team has to, and that can take a few days. So, and then on top of that, it is a little bit more kind of manual transmission than Lambda because Paperspace, it's a bit more of I should say a kind of configurable and extensible platform, right? So. And then, of course, I see a lot of people using Vast.ai because they have the absolute cheapest prices. The only reason I'm not going to recommend them for this tutorial is because they use Docker images only. And so if we want to get into how you really kind of fine-tune your setup, then we have to get into learning Docker. So that's an additional layer of complexity. And then, of course, many people are familiar with Google Cloud, who has long been known for their AI and machine learning offerings. And I personally think they're the easiest to use enterprise class cloud. And so if I'm doing enterprise class applications, they're definitely the first one I really go for. Have to also disclose I used to work for Google Cloud. And then, of course, AWS and Azure, these are also really great platforms. The only reason I don't recommend them for this tutorial is these are enterprise class, and so the learning curves are quite large. Now let's get started on actually choosing our cloud. I know that I already told you guys that we're going to be using Lambda Cloud. In this table, I summarize basically why I'm choosing Lambda Cloud in particular. Now, as of right now, Lambda Cloud is slightly more expensive at the low end than the next kind of most beginner-friendly option, which I believe is Paperspace by DigitalOcean. However, we're still going to use Lambda Cloud because I really think that it is just the most beginner-friendly GPU cloud to use. They give you very standard Linux instances, no surprises. All the drivers are already pre-configured, so you don't have to worry about hardware incompatibilities. And like literally all they do are GPU server rentals. So you'll see the interface for their console is very easy to use, very easy to understand. And particularly, I will call out that Paperspace, which is actually my kind of preferred platform right now. I'm a DigitalOcean user personally for my own personal projects. Right now they have to actually manually approve you to use the GPUs. Their support team has to, and that can take a few days. So, and then on top of that, it is a little bit more kind of manual transmission than Lambda because Paperspace, it's a bit more of I should say a kind of configurable and extensible platform, right? So, and then of course, I see a lot of people using Vast.ai because they have the absolute cheapest prices. The only reason I'm not going to recommend them for this tutorial is because they use Docker images only. And so if we want to get into how you really kind of fine-tune your setup, then we have to get into learning Docker. So that's an additional layer of complexity. And then, of course, many people are familiar with Google Cloud, who has long been known for their AI and machine learning offerings. And I personally think they're the easiest to use enterprise class cloud. And so if I'm doing enterprise class applications, they're definitely the first one I really go for. Have to also disclose I used to work for Google Cloud. And then, of course, AWS and Azure, these are also really great platforms. The only reason I don't recommend them for this tutorial is these are enterprise class, and so the learning curves are quite large. Okay, so first we will install the software that you need for your local machine. It's just these three things. Probably don't have to totally walk you through this if you're doing a tutorial that's this advanced already, but I'll show you where to find these real quick. So you can download VS Code from their website right here. They have builds for Mac, Windows, and basically any regular desktop platform out there. After you install VS Code, go ahead and open it. Your home screen will look something like this. And you'll see that right here, these blocks, this is extensions. Click on that, search for SSH. You'll find this extension called Remote SSH. And just go ahead and install this. You don't have to configure anything yet. We'll do that in a moment. But this is how we'll actually work with our remote server. It's a very convenient extension. And finally, you can download FileZilla at this website, filezillaproject.org. I think you can probably figure out how to install this. Great, so now that you have that software installed, we're going to go ahead and populate our Secure Shell folder. So if you haven't used Secure Shell before, all of your Secure Shell configuration is stored in this folder. It's in a slightly different place if you're using Mac versus Windows. And then also if you have to be using Linux, you probably already know how to use Secure Shell, but it's the same directory, little tilde thing /.ssh. Please note that this is a hidden folder, so you might have to enable hidden folders to go ahead and see it. And then on Windows, you may have to create this folder first. However, Windows does in fact come with Secure Shell nowadays. You don't have to install PuTTY or anything anymore. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our config file. So I'll show you how to do this on Mac and Windows, just in case you need instructions for either. So we'll use Visual Studio Code for this, just to kind of get used to it. To open a folder, you can open the command palette by hitting Command-Shift-P, or I think it's Alt-Shift-P on Windows. Open the folder, and see users, Toby, that's my home folder. We'll open this, and within it, we are going to have this .ssh folder. If we go to the Explorer view, and create this file if you don't have it already, called config. And don't worry, you don't have these files yet because I've already been using this. And then let's edit this to look as much like the architecture diagram as we can. So if we flip back over to the architecture diagram real quick, we see our server is called Lambda GPU server. I already have an entry here, so I'm going to rename it to look like that. So Lambda GPU server. I haven't provisioned one yet, so we'll actually just delete the IP address for now. And let's rename this to be the same as the name of the private key that we're going to give it. So we'll delete this, and we're going to name this private key lambda.privatekey. That's not a common way to name it with the extension, but I'm just doing that for clarity. Should also remind you, do not put this anywhere that's not private. Identities only just means that it will only use this file. And then this line right here instructs your Secure Shell client to forward your local port 8188 to the server's port 8188. And so when you're running ComfyUI, this will allow you to access that via Secure Shell and without exposing your web interface to the public. And then this right here, you don't really have to worry about. This is just a configuration I use to push code to GitHub. Okay, and so now we're on Windows, and I was actually wrong. The shortcut is Control-Shift-P to open the command palette, open folder, and yeah, look for your home directory. So it'll be at C, users, and then for me it's Toby T. Select that, and in Here I don't have a .ssh folder yet, so we'll make one, .ssh, like so. And in it, you'll make a config file and fill it in exactly like we did for Mac and Linux. Okay, so now we're going to provision our GPU server, and we'll take information from that server and use it to finish configuring our local machine. You'll have to configure your local machine each time, but you'll see it's actually very easy. It only takes 10 seconds, so it's not that big of a deal. And for those of you new to cloud, provision is just a very fancy word that means make a new server. So first, you're going to have to go to Lambda Labs' homepage right here, and then go to Cloud, and then Cloud Sign In. The first time you click this, you'll have to enter some billing information because you can't run these servers for free. Okay, so once you've entered your information, you'll be at the Instances page. Launch an instance. Just choose the cheapest one. They're out of capacity for the 50 cent an hour ones right now, so we'll use the NVIDIA A10. Still quite a beefy instance, and it's a pretty cheap price. Choose the region closest to you. You will have to choose the same region every time because your file system will be physically located in that data center. I've already created this file system called Lambda Persistent Volume, so you'll create one and name it this. I'm going to select it. You probably haven't made an SSH key yet, so go ahead and generate one. And like I mentioned, we're going to call this lambda.privatekey, create it. It's going to ask us to download it. So you want to save this in your .ssh folder. If you're on Mac, you're going to have to hit Command-Shift-Dot to show your hidden folders, such as .ssh. On Windows, I don't know if the .ssh folder will be hidden or not. You may have to show it, but go ahead and click there, and then get rid of this .pem extension, like so, and you'll save it. I already have one there, so I'll just replace it like so. Then finally, very important, but you have to agree to not mine cryptocurrency. If you lose that private key or you change your firewall settings, cryptocurrency miners will hack your server and they will mine cryptocurrency on your server, and then you will be banned from Lambda Labs. So you don't want that. So you agree. It'll start launching this instance, and just for consistency, we'll name this Lambda GPU server, because that's what we named it in the diagram, like so. This will take a few minutes to boot, but while it's booting, we can go ahead and we can configure our local machine. Just a quick note and a small mistake I made. I noticed that when I saved my private key on Mac, it actually gave it this extra extension, .sir. So you'll have to change this if you want it to actually work in your config file. So just rename it like so. Make sure it's named just lambda.privatekey, and then you'll be all good. And I know that the key is exposed right here, but I'm going to delete this key before I release this video. Okay, so after it's been 30 seconds or so, IP address has popped up here. So now we can add this to our config file so that we can SSH in. So I'm just going to copy this by clicking on it. And then let's go ahead and find VS Code. And our config file is still up. So we'll go ahead and just paste that in there. That's a bit too close to the host name. Add a space there, so it should look just like this. You'll get a different IP address than me, obviously. Go ahead and save that file. So in the future, when you provision a new instance after you've destroyed your old one, this will be the only part of your setup you're going to have to edit each time. So I know it's a small amount of labor you have to do, but that's the small cost we pay for not having to pay for the server when we're not using it. And I think it's well worth the cost. All right, and one other thing is many times when you save your private key, it won't have the right permissions for the OpenSSH protocol. It's very strict on file permissions. So open a terminal. If you're on Mac, you can do that with Control and then this kind of backtick CD into your .ssh directory. Oh, I'm actually already in it. And then what you're going to do is type the command change mode 600 and then the name of your private key, like so. And so that will set your permissions appropriately. On Windows, just for some demonstration, you can go ahead to your private key file and then click Reveal in File Explorer. And then if you go to Properties, look for Security, I believe. And we want only your user should be allowed to read and write this file. I've actually never edited permissions on Windows before, so let's see if I can figure it out. So I guess system, we can't change. Maybe we can remove it. No, we can't. Administrators, I guess we can't change. So yeah, it looks like it's just me that has permissions, at least that I can remove. And I believe that should keep you from getting an error when you SSH in. So, but basically on Windows, you need to make sure that only one user has, which is you, has read and write permissions on the private key file. Otherwise, the OpenSSH protocol will reject it. If you get an error when you try to SSH into your server, in the next step, it may be this permissions issue if you're using Windows. Okay, so let's actually SSH into our server. So open up your command palette and type in SSH. You'll find this SSH connect to host, and you'll see it reads our config file and finds Lambda GPU server. In fact, if you add a new SSH host, all this will do is add a new entry to your config file. So we click that. It'll open a new remote window. Click continue on this prompt. And it now let us in. I'm going to close my local window right here. Save this. And you'll see that we get this terminal to start with. And so if we do, say, a pwd, we'll see that we're in the home folder. And if we do an ls-l, we'll see that we have the Lambda persistent volume right in our home folder. So let's go ahead and open that folder because that's where we're going to be actually working. So if we click this, we see that we actually get the Lambda persistent volume, and we'll open it. And so now we'll trust it. Yes, I trust myself. So now we're working in our currently empty Lambda persistent volume directory, and we're connected over SSH, which it shows us right here. And so if we type pwd, we see that we're starting in that directory. So now we can clone ComfyUI from the GitHub. So let's go ahead and do that. So I just find it by typing ComfyUI into Google, ComfyUI GitHub. Let's go to that tab. We find it right here. It's by Comfy Anonymous. And we can clone this repo, and we'll start setting it up using this green code button right here. So just go ahead and copy this HTTP URL like so. And let's go back to our VS Code instance. And all we have to do is inside Lambda persistent volume, type git clone, and then paste that URL. And that will clone it into your server. You see it doesn't take very long at all. And you can see now that we've cloned it, we now have this folder called ComfyUI, and we can see the whole repo inside of here. So this is where we're going to be when we're configuring ComfyUI. If we scroll down to the Linux install instructions, We've already done the first thing, which is git clone repo. So now we need to put the checkpoint and VAE file into the appropriate directories so that ComfyUI can run something when we launch it. So let's go ahead and find that real quick. For me to actually find these, what I do is I just look for Stability AI on Hugging Face. It's kind of like GitHub for AI models if you haven't been there before. So we'll go to Stability AI, and if we look for Stable Diffusion XL, let's see what we can find here. Here is Stable Diffusion XL Turbo. So let's go ahead and I think we can use that one. Let's find out. Actually, this one, I don't know what the difference is between the Tensor RT and this one, but this one just doesn't have an extension on it, so it seems safer to me. Files. And so you see that we have this really big 13 gigabyte file right there. So what we need to do is go ahead and click this, and we're going to need this download link right here. So go ahead and copy the link address. So let's go back to our terminal in VS Code, and we're going to have to go to the models folder right here. And you see it has this folder called checkpoints. So to get there, we can just type change directory, ComfyUI. This is actually case sensitive, models, and then checkpoints, like so. Once you're in there, you can type wget, and then paste that link that you just copied like so, and hit enter, and it will go ahead and download this super large file. Fortunately, we're on a cloud server, so it's only going to take a minute and 40 seconds or so to download this. In the meantime, while we're waiting for this to download, let's go ahead and find that VAE file. So if we come back here to the Hugging Face, we go back to Stability AI. Let's go back to the models again, and we'll search for VAE. So yeah, here we go. We have Stable Diffusion XL, VAE. So we'll click that one, go to Files and Versions, and we want this file right here, the safe tensors. Same thing, copy the link address like so. Now we can download that VAE file. To do that, we'll change directory into the VAE model folder, and then we'll just wget that URL that we copied from Hugging Face. This one's smaller, so it goes faster. So let's look at what's next on our instructions. So if we come back to the manual install, we've done these 3 things. That's great. There's only 5 steps that we need to follow. So now we have to install PyTorch and stuff, and we also have to install these dependencies. Now these are Python dependencies, so like I mentioned, we have to actually create a Python virtual environment so that we don't lose our installation in between terminating server instances. So to do that, let's go ahead and go back to the root of the ComfyUI repo. So we can do that by doing change directory and then .. And you can see that we're in just the ComfyUI root. And what we want to do is run this command. It's Python -m virtual environment, spelled like this, VENV, and then we'll call it ComfyUI VENV for virtual environment, like so. So this command may take a moment to run, and it's going to set up its own Python distribution in a folder called ComfyUI virtual environment. Okay, it's done. And so now if we look at the Explorer bar now, we'll see we now have this folder right here, ComfyUI venv, And we're going to use this script called activate, and this will give us our own environment for while we're actually using this shell. So what we'll do is source ComfyUI underscore virtual environment bin activate, like so. And then our prompt changes to this. It has ComfyUI venv in front of it, which means that we're in that virtual environment. You will need to do this each time that you open a new terminal session, just to let you know. So this won't automatically happen. You'll have to run this command each time. Let me just demonstrate for you what this actually means. We're using the virtual environment. So you see right now we're using the virtual environment. If we type which Python, you see that it's using a Python instance that's inside our ComfyUI repo. And if we type which pip, which is the package manager, it's also inside this repo. But now if we start a new terminal and we type which Python, we get a different answer. This is the one installed on the server itself. So this instance will go away when we destroy the server, and same for the pip instance. So in this case, you'll have to reactivate the environment if you're using a new terminal. So let's go ahead and clear that garbage, and let's install the dependencies. So coming back over, we see that the first one it wants us to install is Torch, Torch Vision, Torch Audio, and something extra right there. So let's go ahead and copy this command to our virtual environment, like so. Hit enter. And this may take a little bit of time to run. I'll just let the video recording run, and then I'll just speed this up while it finishes. Okay, that's finished installing. So let's look at the next step here. Going back to the ComfyUI GitHub repo. We now need to install the requirements. Requirements.txt, this is just a file used by Python developers to tell people using their software what external packages to install. So just showing you what this file looks like right here. You can see it's just a list of external Python packages that we should install to make it so ComfyUI can run. You might recognize some of these like Pillow and Torch Vision. A lot of these things are used for machine learning software. We can install it by typing pip install-r requirements.txt. And I already have them installed, so you see it tells me that right there, but your progress will take a little bit longer. So now that we have all the dependencies installed, we can now run ComfyUI. I'll show you how to find how to do that. If you go to the ComfyUI GitHub again, and we scroll down, we'll see there is a section on running. And you see it's pretty simple. Just type python main.py. So if we go back here and try that out, python main.py, make sure that you're in the root directory of ComfyUI. We'll start getting some terminal output. Might take a moment here. Okay, and you can see it's running on our server. It says NVIDIA A10. And yeah, so it's running on localhost 8188 on the server. And you can see Visual Studio Code actually notified us that we have this forwarded port because 8188 is forwarded. Just to remind you, the reason why this is about to work and we can access it even though it's running on localhost on the server and not on our local machine is because we configured port forwarding in our SSH config file earlier. So let's try this out real quick. So if we go to our web browser, and we type in 127.0.0.1, port 8188, we get ComfyUI. So check that out. Now, we can go ahead and test this out and make sure that it works. So let's cue the prompt, and let's see how long this takes to run. Okay, so it just finished. I think that took about 30 seconds, and we got our image output, so that's great. Now, to go ahead and stop the server, if you come back to your command line where you started it, all you have to do is type Control-C, and you see that actually stops the running server. And so now if we go and refresh this page, it'll say that the site can't be reached. All right, so let's go ahead and repeat this whole workflow from scratch. So first, let's terminate our server. Remember, this is very important so you don't go poor. Type erase data on instance. This will not erase your persistent drive like I mentioned. It'll only erase the temporary hard disk that's on your ephemeral server instance. So we terminate that. And while it's terminating, let's go ahead and launch a new instance. Choose the same one. Be sure to choose the same region. Choose your same persistent volume and your same private key. Launch it. And then we'll have to give this just a moment to populate an IP address, and then we'll update our config file. We have our new IP address, so let's go ahead and copy that, and let's go ahead and edit our config file. I'm just going to use vim right here, .ssh/config. And the only thing we have to edit, like I mentioned before, is the host name. So paste that new one in there. And now that's written out, this GPU server is now running. So we can launch our ComfyUI server the same way again. So just type SSH lambda GPU server. We'll accept the fingerprint again. We're in. We'll change the directory to ComfyUI. So lambda persistent volume /ComfyUI. We'll activate our Python virtual environment by typing source ComfyUI venv bin activate. And so now we're in our virtual environment. Then just type Python main.py. Wait for our server to spin up. Okay, it says it's there. So now if we go back here and we type in 127.0.0.1 port 8188 again, we get ComfyUI. So you can see it's right here running. And then if we stop the server, we refresh the page, doesn't work yet again. And finally, we just need to shut down our instance so we stop getting charged. Erase data on instance. And that's the whole workflow right there. So you see it's pretty quick. So one quick note I wanted to call out, I mentioned this briefly at the beginning, but you can use FileZilla for file transfer. I'll just show you how to do that really quick. So let's go ahead and look at our config file to give us a reference. So if we open folder, oh, we don't want it in here. Let's close this VS Code instance and open a local one. So opening my home directory, if we go to the config file, we see our information right here. So we can reference this to create a FileZilla connection. This is FileZilla. you can edit your connections right here. So we can create a new site. Ignore this. It's not. Get rid of that first. New site. We'll call this Lambda GPU server. For host, same thing as over here. So it's, in my case, 192.9.241.57, port 22. You're going to set it to SFTP protocol. The username is Ubuntu. There's no password, and then you should be able to connect. Hit OK. What mistake did we make here? We need a key file. That's a mistake we made. So hit browse, and you'll use the Lambda private key. Hit connect, and this time it works. So you can see you can go to the persistent volume, ComfyUI, and so if you wanted to back this whole thing up, you could navigate somewhere, I don't know where you want to go, and right-click this and then download it. This would take a very long time to download, so if you want it to be faster, one thing you can do is you can make this into a tarball or a zip before you download it, and that'll speed things up significantly. But if you've got a lot of time, you can just download the whole thing. You can go ahead and look up how to tarball something on Linux if you want. It's pretty simple, but just I would give that tip right here. So also, if you have models downloaded onto your computer and you want to upload them into ComfyUI, you can of course do that by uploading them to the models folder like so. So that also works. And if you have images or whatever you want to download down from your server, you can do that as well. So this is just a little bit more of a versatile tool for transferring files. A lot of people say to use SCP. I find SCP to be insufferable. It's slow to use. But FileZilla allows you to browse and transfer files at will and relatively quickly over SFTP. So hope that's a useful little tip there. Just a final note, I really want to reiterate this. Don't become this guy. If you leave too many GPU servers on, I mean, this won't happen with these 50 or 75 cent an hour ones, but you know, if you go leave an H100 on for a month, you're going to become this guy. You'll be homeless, and this guy will be asking you if you got into drugs or something. So please, please, please terminate your instances when you're done with them, unless you're doing production work and you have to leave those servers up. So remember, just go to your instances page, click the checkbox, and hit terminate. Erase data on instance, and then it will terminate. So that looks good. See, no longer be charged. And so in summary, here's what we now know. We know how to provision a GPU server and a persistent volume, just similar to this architecture diagram up at the top here. So now you know how to build this. You can do it for anyone, and this whole setup works for any type of web server you want to set up. It doesn't just work for ComfyUI. So you have a new skill if you didn't know how to do this before. You know how to use Secure Shell to manage your server. Great. It's a very important skill for any aspiring software developer or sysadmin. We know how to install and configure ComfyUI and Stable Diffusion. We see that actually it's pretty simple. I really like the way the author of ComfyUI set everything up. We learned how to use SFTP to transfer files using FileZilla, so that was kind of some bonus content. And finally, deprovision your server so you don't go broke. So that's it. If you like this or you want to connect, feel free to find me on LinkedIn. This is where I hang out. You know, maybe we'll cross paths at a conference or something. I'm always around Silicon Valley somewhere. So thanks for tuning into this tutorial, and I do really hope that it helps somebody. If there's something else you want to know or different variations of architecture you want to get into, just drop me a comment. This is the first time I've shot a long form tutorial like this, so I have no idea if it was the right format or not. So just kind of putting it out there. And yeah, hope you enjoyed this.